The sound of screeching metal ripped through the neighborhood like nails on a chalkboard. I dropped my coffee mug as I bolted toward the porch, the ceramic shattering behind me. Maya was shouting loudly. That wasn't like her. She never shouted unless something was seriously wrong. What I saw froze my blood cold. A construction worker in a neon vest was welding an iron gate directly across the base of our handicap ramp, our only wheelchair-accessible way in and out of our house. Standing behind him, arms folded smugly, HOA President Karen watched the scene unfold like a queen overseeing a moat being drawn. Maya, my wife, was stuck at the top of the stairs, trapped. She banged her palm against the metal handrail, voice shaking with rage. "You're blocking the ramp. That's illegal." Karen just smiled, sunglasses perched high on her forehead like she thought she was in a designer magazine shoot instead of committing a civil rights violation on a Tuesday morning. It didn't matter that the ramp was approved by the city. Didn't matter that Maya had been using it since we moved in. Didn't matter that it was built by code, signed off by an inspector, and paid for with our own money. Karen had decided it violated HOA aesthetic standards and summoned a contractor, one she later admitted hired off Craigslist, to install a decorative iron barrier to preserve neighborhood beauty. The fact that Maya was now quite literally trapped in her own home was, according to Karen, unfortunate timing. I could feel my fists clenching, but Maya, despite the shaking in her hands, pulled out her phone and began filming. Her voice didn't shake. State law, federal law, ADA compliance. You're violating all of them right now. Keep smiling for the camera, Karen. Karen stepped into frame, leaned toward the phone, and said with a sweet voice dripping with sarcasm, "We just want everything to look uniform, dear. This is a gated community after all." Then she actually had the gall to wink. Maya stopped filming and turned to me. Her voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. She has no idea who she just locked out. That night our house felt more like a prison. Maya couldn't use the front door, couldn't go outside to water the garden she loved, couldn't roll down the ramp to get the mail or visit her therapy group. The gate had been welded shut, and the lock Karen installed, bright silver, the kind they use on public restrooms, mocked us from the other side of the steel bars. I had to carry Maya down the front steps when she needed to leave. I had to lift her back up when we returned. Every time she clutched my neck and apologized, I felt another piece of myself break. She had fought so hard to live independently, and now, thanks to one entitled woman with a clipboard and a God complex, my wife had to be carried like cargo on her own property. I knew Maya was angry, but she didn't scream or rant. She went quiet, too quiet. When Maya gets quiet, that's when things get dangerous. Not for her, but for whoever messed with her. Because what Karen didn't know, and what she never bothered to find out, was that Maya wasn't just some suburban wife in a wheelchair. She was a civil rights lawyer, a good one. The kind who had once forced a state university to rebuild 6 dorms after proving they weren't ADA compliant. The kind who had testified before Congress about disability rights. The kind who didn't lose cases. She ended careers. By midnight, she was sitting in her office, eyes scanning municipal codes like a bloodhound. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up building permits, HOA bylaws, city ordinances, state-level exceptions, and civil precedent. Then she filed an official cease and desist order. It was only the first shot. She made sure to attach photos of the locked gate, medical documentation proving her condition, and a highlighted section from the Americans with Disabilities Act that basically screamed, "You can't do this, you idiot." Karen received it the next morning, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. She posted a smug message on the neighborhood forum saying that HOA had the right to regulate external structures and that residents needed to respect communal standards. 2 days later, our mailbox turned red. Not figuratively. Someone had painted it badly with a bright, aggressive red coat and slapped a non-standard color violation notice across the side. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we're doing petty now." Fine. We replaced the mailbox with a perfectly legal black one that same night. The next morning, we found it ripped out of the ground and left on the porch like a dead fish. Karen had clearly declared war, Neighbors began whispering. Some crossed the street when they saw us. Others dropped anonymous notes in our mailbox, notes of support saying they disagreed with Karen, but didn't want to get involved. One even wrote, "She threatened to fine me for putting wind chimes on my porch. I'm scared of her too." But Maya wasn't scared. She was focused. I watched her build a case like she was assembling a bomb, piece by precise piece. Every email Karen sent, every post she made, every photo we took of that cursed gate, it all became evidence. Then came the HOA meeting. Karen called it herself. We weren't invited. Maya showed up anyway. When we entered the community hall, it went silent. Karen was standing at the front like a substitute teacher no one liked, flanked by 2 other board members. "This is a closed session," she said, lips tight. Maya rolled to the center of the room and pulled out a manila folder. "This is a violation of Civil Code Section 42 of the ABA, and I'm issuing formal notice that any further discrimination will be grounds for federal action." She placed the folder on the table like a mic drop. Karen didn't say a word, but her neck turned red, her hands curled into fists, and for a split second, she looked afraid. That night, Maya received an anonymous message, a screenshot from a private HOA group chat with a title that read "Rampage Plan." The messages inside were horrifying. They joked about sabotaging the ramp. One board member even suggested planting weeds and blaming it on landscaping code. Another posted a meme of a woman in a wheelchair with a caption that read, "Just take the stairs, lazy." Maya stared at the screen for a long time, then looked at me. This isn't just HOA drama anymore. This is a civil rights case now, and I'm going to make sure they learn exactly what that means. Karen had no idea what she had just started. By the time it was over, she wouldn't even recognize the world she thought she controlled. By the end of the week, our house had become a war zone dressed in polite HOA language and wrapped in fake niceties. The red mailbox incident was only the opening act. Next came a series of escalating violations issued daily by Karen and her newly emboldened board. They claimed our trash bins were out 5 minutes too early, even though we'd rolled them out the same time as everyone else. Then our porch light was declared too bright, despite it being the exact model used by 3 other homes on the block. One day, Maya woke up to find a notice taped to our door that said her therapy garden, her collection of lavender, rosemary, and sage, was unauthorized landscaping. That one stung. Those plants weren't just decoration. They were her comfort, a part of her daily healing, and now Karen had declared war on even that. The garden violation was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was targeting Maya personally. Maya, however, didn't react the way Karen probably hoped she would. She didn't crumble. She didn't lash out emotionally. Instead, she began assembling legal paperwork with the precision of a surgeon. The language she used was calm but surgical, every sentence a scalpel slicing into the heart of HOA overreach. She filed a formal complaint with the city zoning board, then another with the state housing authority. She contacted the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division and even reached out to the ACLU just to let them know a case might be incoming. I watched her turn into a force of nature, quiet, relentless, and impossible to stop. Her legal documents read like poems, if poems could leave people bankrupt and humiliated. Karen, in her infinite arrogance, continued to provoke. She sent out a community-wide email stating that non-standard homeowners attempting to exploit federal loopholes were causing disharmony in the neighborhood. Maya read that line and let out a single short laugh, not out of amusement, but the kind of laugh that says, "You just handed me everything I needed." That same day, Maya filed an official federal lawsuit citing discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, violations of the Fair Housing Act, and intentional emotional distress. It wasn't just aimed at Karen. It named the entire HOA board. What no one knew was that Maya had been collecting more than just screenshots and pictures. She had been documenting Karen's group chats through a quiet but bold ally, Melissa, a longtime neighbor who had once been publicly berated by Karen for having a rainbow welcome mat. Melissa had finally had enough and started forwarding Maya everything. There were text messages mocking Maya's wheelchair, Karen saying things like, Her ramp makes the street look like a hospital wing, and if she wants to sue, let her. She's just a housewife with a chip on her shoulder. That last one had Maya raising an eyebrow. A housewife. Interesting choice of words. She smiled and opened her LinkedIn profile, where her job title read Senior Civil Rights Litigation Specialist, Federal Court Appointed. With the lawsuit filed and the documents served, the mood in the neighborhood shifted dramatically. People who had once avoided eye contact now stopped us on walks. Well, during the rare occasions we managed to leave through the back door, since the front was still locked behind Karen's iron gate. Some neighbors apologized, others offered help. A few said, "I never liked her anyway." But Maya wasn't interested in personal apologies. She was after institutional accountability, and she wasn't done. Then came the real surprise. A local news reporter, Amanda, who covered city government and neighborhood drama with a flair for exposing the absurd, picked up the story. She reached out after receiving an anonymous tip, probably Melissa again. She showed up one afternoon with a small crew and asked Maya if she was willing to go on record. Maya agreed, but not without conditions. The interview would be held on our front porch, with the locked gate clearly in the frame. The resulting footage was pure gold. Amanda panned slowly across the ramp, now visibly blocked by black metal bars and a silver padlock. Then the camera zoomed in on Maya, dressed sharply in her navy blazer, looking calm, intelligent, and commanding. She said clearly and without hesitation, "This isn't just about me. This is about every disabled person who's ever been treated like an inconvenience. The law exists for a reason, and it applies here just like it does anywhere else." Amanda nodded solemnly. By the time the report aired that evening, it was already going viral. The headline read, "HOA blocks disabled woman's ramp, civil rights lawsuit filed." The image of the locked gate with Maya behind it flooded social media. Karen, predictably, did not take it well. She posted a bizarre response video in front of her rose bushes, trying to spin the story. She blamed fake news, claimed the ramp was a temporary structure, and suggested Maya was weaponizing her condition. It only made things worse. Within hours, Karen's video was flooded with laughing emojis, clown gifs, and duets mocking her phrasing. One popular TikTok creator did a dramatic reading of her statement while dressed as a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. Karen tried to take the video down, but the internet had already immortalized it. The next twist came when Maya received a certified envelope from the county courthouse. An emergency injunction hearing had been scheduled. The judge had seen the media coverage and fast-tracked the case. Karen would now have to explain her actions in front of a real judge, not just her HOA clipboard. Maya got quiet again. She spent the next 48 hours preparing. She didn't just gather legal citations. She built a timeline, a psychological pattern of harassment, and even a financial audit showing misuse of HOA funds used to hire the unauthorized contractor. It was brutal. It was beautiful. Meanwhile, Karen continued pretending nothing was wrong. She held a Sunday brunch for her remaining supporters and posted pictures with captions like, "Community unity always wins." But the smiles in the pictures looked forced. The crowd was noticeably thinner, and comments under the posts were anything but supportive. One said, "Blocking someone's medical ramp isn't unity, it's cowardice." Another read, "Hope your brunch tastes better than your defense will in court." On the day before the hearing, Melissa stopped by and handed Maya a final gift, a printed transcript of a conversation where Karen admitted she had no idea the ramp was permitted and said, "I thought they'd be too scared to fight back." Maya placed the transcript on top of her court documents and calmly said, "Perfect. That'll go right after the ADA clause and right before the photos." That night, the mood was different, not tense, focused. We didn't feel like victims anymore. Maya looked powerful, unstoppable. The lawsuit had grown bigger than us now. The neighborhood was watching. The internet was watching. And in less than 24 hours, Karen was going to find out what happens when the person you try to shut down is the one holding the keys to the courthouse. The courthouse buzzed with a quiet kind of electricity, the kind that hangs in the air when something important is about to unfold. It wasn't a massive media circus, but there were cameras outside, a few microphones on the steps, and more than a dozen curious neighbors standing off to the side, pretending to check their phones. Karen pulled up late in a gleaming white SUV, stepping out in an outfit that looked more like she was headed to a brunch than a legal hearing. She wore a blazer that sparkled slightly in the sun, oversized sunglasses, and heels far too tall for a courtroom. But what stood out more than her clothes was her expression, completely unfazed, like she still thought this entire lawsuit was a silly misunderstanding that would melt away once she explained her perspective. That delusion would not last long. Inside, the room filled with a low murmur of tension. Karen was seated on one side with her attorney, a guy who looked fresh out of law school and kept flipping through a binder nervously. On our side, Maya sat poised and silent, her documents organized so precisely it looked like a military operation. I could feel the weight of every stare in the room land on her, some sympathetic, some curious, some uncertain. But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She adjusted the wheels on her chair slightly and kept her chin high as the judge entered. The judge, to everyone's surprise, was a middle-aged woman in a motorized wheelchair. The courtroom went dead silent as she rolled to her seat. Karen visibly stiffened. Her lawyer blinked rapidly. I saw Maya's lips curl into the smallest hint of a smile. Not smug, not triumphant, just grounded. This was justice in its purest, most poetic form. The judge looked over the case summary, flipped through some pages, and then glanced up. "So," she said flatly, "this is about a homeowners association that blocked a handicap-accessible ramp with an iron gate. Is that correct?" Karen's lawyer stood up quickly. "Your Honor, the HOA had aesthetic concerns and—" The judge raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Yes or no?" He paused. "Technically, yes." The judge leaned back. "Then this won't take long." Maya was invited to speak first. She rolled forward slowly, unbothered by the moment, and spoke directly to the room. She didn't dramatize or exaggerate. She laid out the facts like a blueprint: the medical necessity of the ramp, the permits, the pre-approval by the city, the abrupt installation of the iron gate, the padlock, the retaliatory fines, and the mounting harassment. Then she handed over the HOA group chat transcript. The moment those hit the judge's bench, everything changed. Karen's face drained of color as the judge read the messages aloud. "Plant weeds and blame landscaping codes. Just take the stairs, lazy. That ramp looks like a hospital entrance. Bring the gate forward by 5 feet so they can't use it." The judge stopped reading, took off her glasses, and stared directly at Karen. "Were you part of this conversation?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but her lawyer jumped in, deflecting with vague words about unofficial communication and unverified screenshots. Maya responded by producing the IP logs, dates, and screenshots showing Karen's exact username. The judge leaned in slightly. "Ma'am, this is not just a zoning dispute. This is targeted harassment." Karen tried to spin the situation. She said the ramp wasn't part of the original neighborhood layout, that she was merely enforcing HOA standards, and that she never meant to cause distress. But Maya countered everything. Each regulation Karen tried to hide behind, Maya dismantled with actual law. The final blow came when Maya pulled out a printed email showing Karen had hired the contractor with HOA discretionary funds, without a vote, without documentation, and without disclosure. The judge narrowed her eyes. "So you misused HOA funds, bypassed board approval, and directly interfered with this resident's ADA-certified access ramp." The silence in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the judge spoke again, but this time louder, for everyone to hear. "Let me be extremely clear. What you did wasn't just wrong. It was illegal, discriminatory, and shameful. And to do it under the pretense of neighborhood standards shows not just a lack of judgment, but a lack of basic humanity." Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Karen herself shrank into her seat, her posture folding in on itself like a deflating balloon. It was a sight I never expected to see, a woman so full of smug self-importance suddenly realizing her entire persona was built on sand. But the surprises weren't over. As the judge was preparing to finalize her ruling, she turned to Maya. Would you like to make a recommendation for reparative measures, financial or otherwise?" Maya, calm as ever, said, "Yes, Your Honor. I'm requesting complete removal of the gate, restoration of the ramp, a public apology, and mandatory HOA training on ADA compliance conducted by a third-party legal firm. And I want the fines and violations against us formally erased from the HOA record." The judge didn't even blink. "Granted. All of it." Then she turned to Karen. "And you, Ms. Hopkins, will personally issue a public apology at the next HOA meeting. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties and possible contempt of court." Karen opened her mouth again as if to protest, but the judge didn't give her a chance. Dismissed. Outside the courtroom, the air felt 10 degrees lighter. Neighbors who had quietly attended the hearing now approached Maya to offer congratulations, apologies, and for the first time, genuine respect. Even the news crew from earlier was there again. Amanda asked if Maya would like to give a follow-up interview. Maya declined politely but offered one simple line on camera. This was never about revenge. It was about rights. And today, rights won. The clip aired that evening, and Karen's apology speech was scheduled for the next HOA meeting, which promised to be the most attended one in the neighborhood's history. Over the following days, Karen's grip on the community unraveled. Neighbors she once bossed around started demanding a formal board re-election. Several former allies on the HOA quietly resigned. The decorative iron gate was removed by a professional crew, and the ramp was restored to full function. But it wasn't just rebuilt, it was improved. A neighbor who ran a construction business offered to widen it, add new railings, and install solar-powered lights along the edges. Someone even planted flowers at the base, turning it into something that wasn't just functional but beautiful. Karen, meanwhile, had vanished from the HOA forums. Her once daily announcements were gone. Her Facebook profile went private. The Rampage Plan group chat was shut down, and rumors started circulating that she was planning to move. Whether she did or not didn't really matter. Her authority had evaporated. Her influence had shattered. And her legacy would forever be tied to the day she tried to block a woman from leaving her own home and ended up being blocked from the very community she tried to control. The day of the HOA meeting arrived like the calm before a storm, except this time, everyone already knew the storm had a name, and it was Karen. Flyers had been distributed door to door by a newly formed residents committee, not affiliated with Karen's HOA rulebook, but determined to restore fairness in the neighborhood. The meeting was held in the community center, the same one where Karen once barked out her so-called aesthetic guidelines like commandments from a mountaintop. But this time, the atmosphere was different. More than half the community showed up, many with folded arms, tight expressions, and that particular type of quiet anger reserved for tyrants who finally slip. Karen was already there when we walked in, sitting stiffly behind the folding table designated for board members, her signature clipboard nowhere in sight. She looked smaller than usual, stripped of the smug energy that once radiated from her like static electricity. 2 other board members sat next to her, both clearly uneasy, their expressions flickering between embarrassment and guilt. Maya rolled in without fanfare, dressed in calm blue, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to make an entrance. Everyone in the room knew what she'd done and why they were all there. The meeting began with the usual robotic reading of past minutes, but no one was listening. Everyone was waiting for one thing, the apology. When it came time, Karen stood slowly. She cleared her throat, looked down, then up, then down again. The words she had been forced to write, or perhaps coached to read, came out in flat, stilted sentences. "I apologize to Mrs. Maya Harris and her husband for the events surrounding the ramp access. My actions, while intended to preserve neighborhood standards, unintentionally caused harm and inconvenience. I regret the decisions made and accept the court's ruling." There was a pause, no applause, no forgiveness, just silence. Karen looked around, searching for someone to save her from the moment. No one did. Then she sat, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. Maya didn't react. She didn't smirk. She didn't nod. She simply waited as the new agenda began, this time led by a resident named George. a retired firefighter who had once been fined by Karen for keeping his hose reel too visible. George addressed the group with a quiet authority, proposing new elections, new oversight policies, and most importantly, mandatory accessibility compliance education for all board members. A round of applause broke out when he was finished. The vote passed unanimously. Karen didn't even raise her hand. What followed was a flurry of transformation. Within days, Maya began receiving emails from people across the neighborhood, some asking questions about ADA law, others requesting guidance on how to make their properties more accessible, and a few simply wanting to thank her. One neighbor, whose son used a walker, said she'd always felt too afraid to request a ramp until Maya stood her ground. Another mentioned they had a mother with limited mobility and would now be installing railings and ramps with confidence. It wasn't just a win for Maya anymore. It was a ripple effect. Then came the moment none of us expected. A local disability rights organization reached out after seeing the news coverage. They invited Maya to speak at an upcoming advocacy event. At first, she hesitated. She'd never considered herself an activist in the performative sense. She was a litigator, a strategist, someone who liked to work behind the scenes. But I encouraged her to do it, not for the recognition, but because her voice could help people far beyond our HOA drama. She agreed, and I watched her speak to a room full of strangers with the same clarity and grace she used in court. She didn't just tell them what happened. She explained why it mattered, how easily people like Karen can weaponize bureaucracy to silence and isolate, and how the law is only as powerful as the people who are willing to enforce it. Her speech received a standing ovation. Back home, the neighborhood itself began to change in small, tangible ways. That rusted community mailbox, long left half-broken, was finally repaired. The tennis courts were reopened after Karen had locked them for excessive ball noise. A new committee was formed made up of actual volunteers this time, not just Karen's hand-picked favorites, and they began focusing on improvements that mattered: safety, accessibility, fairness. Karen's reign had ended, not with a dramatic exile, but with a complete loss of power. She remained in her house, but her influence had evaporated. She avoided eye contact when she walked her dog. Her once frequent circulars stopped arriving. The HOA forum, once dominated by her rants, now featured discussions about summer block parties and inclusive design ideas. The greatest surprise came when a few neighbors approached us with a gift. It was a handmade sign, crafted from reclaimed wood, beautifully painted with words carved into the surface. "This ramp stands for all." They had planted it right next to the restored ramp, surrounded by flowers. The ramp itself had been upgraded with new weatherproof rails, gentle lighting, and even a small overhang to protect it from rain. Every time Maya rolled down it now, it wasn't just an exit, it was a symbol. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, Maya looked out at the quiet street and asked, "Do you think she's learned anything?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't have to. Some people never change, but sometimes they don't need to. Sometimes it's enough that they lose the ability to hurt others. The power had been stripped away from Karen not because someone yelled louder, but because someone smarter and stronger knew how to fight back with truth and law. That was always Maya's real strength, not just her intelligence, but her refusal to be defined by anger or fear. She didn't burn Karen's kingdom down. She dismantled it piece by piece and replaced it with something better. A week later, we received another envelope, this time from a law journal requesting an article submission on Maya's case. It was a small thing, just a few pages in a quarterly publication, but Maya took it seriously. She spent the next few nights writing by the window, her notes stacked neatly, her expression focused and calm. She titled it Peace Barriers, both seen and unseen, and wrote not just about Karen's actions, but about the broader issue of weaponized authority in small spaces, how power, when unchecked, becomes cruel even in the most mundane places. Her final sentence read, "The ramp outside my house was never just a ramp. It was a line in the sand, a declaration that we all deserve access, not just to spaces, but to dignity." As summer approached, life began to feel normal again. Maya returned to her work. Our home felt peaceful, and the neighborhood was no longer dominated by fear. Karen was still there, yes, but her power was not, And in her absence, something better had taken root. Not revenge, not humiliation, but real, meaningful change. And that, in the end, was the victory that mattered most. A month after the courtroom verdict, the neighborhood felt like it had shed an old skin. What used to be a tightly wound coil of silent tensions and passive-aggressive fines was now starting to resemble a real community. New voices began emerging. People who had kept their heads down for years suddenly started speaking up. Those who were once too intimidated by Karen's reign had discovered, through Maya's stand, that fear wasn't mandatory. Maya didn't just win a lawsuit. She sparked a transformation. Still, even with the victory echoing through the streets, there were quiet reminders that battles like this one left behind more than just new regulations and improved accessibility. One such reminder came in the form of a letter. Unlike the others Maya had received in recent weeks, thank you notes from residents, invitations to speak, even requests from other communities asking for guidance. This one came in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a single sentence. You embarrassed this community. Enjoy your ramp. There was no signature, no indication of who sent it, but we both knew it was someone who still nursed the same twisted ideas that had once given Karen power. Maya didn't flinch. She read it, folded it neatly, and placed it in a folder marked Ignorance. Then she went right back to writing her next op-ed on equity in suburban design. But life wasn't all tension and unresolved bitterness. There were moments of pure light too. One morning, Maya rolled out to find a small group of kids drawing chalk flowers and hearts along the length of her ramp. A little girl with glasses and pigtails told her, "My brother uses a chair like yours. He says you're a superhero." Maya smiled, knelt forward slightly in her chair, and said, "Tell your brother he's my hero too." The girl beamed and ran off to keep drawing. That image, Maya surrounded by chalk art, smiling with sunlight catching her hair, stayed with me longer than any courtroom memory. Then came an unexpected call from a regional civil rights organization. They wanted to nominate Maya for a state-level advocacy award, not for the lawsuit specifically, but for the larger impact she had made by standing up to institutional bullying in a place where people least expected it. Maya hesitated at first. She never did any of this for recognition, but after some nudging from me and a few kind-hearted neighbors, she agreed to attend the ceremony. It was held in the city auditorium, and as we walked in, Maya rolling slowly between rows of suits and dignitaries, I noticed something remarkable. It wasn't just lawyers and officials in attendance. There were families, teachers, construction workers, people from all walks of life who had heard her story and come to show support. When Maya accepted the award, she didn't use her speech to talk about the fight. She talked about what came after. She said, "It's easy to make rules. It's harder to make those rules kind." We talk about access as though it's a luxury, but it's not. Access is how we say you belong here. And when someone tries to take that away from you, you don't just defend your space. You defend the space for everyone who might come next. The crowd rose to their feet before she even finished. And in that moment, I saw something shift in her, something beyond victory. It was legacy. Back in the neighborhood, changes kept coming. The community center, once used for dull HOA meetings, began hosting inclusion workshops and community potlucks. The new board ensured that the HOA guidelines were reevaluated with fairness, practicality, and human decency in mind. They revised outdated clauses, removed vague language that could be exploited, and even added a section about respecting medical accommodations. But perhaps the biggest shift came in how people treated each other. Neighbors started checking in. They asked questions not with suspicion but with curiosity, and they offered help not out of pity but out of connection. One day, Maya was working in her therapy garden when Melissa, the whistleblower from the HOA group chat, stopped by with a wrapped package. It was a photo frame. Inside was a picture of Maya sitting confidently in front of the gate before it was removed, her arms crossed, eyes steady. Melissa had added a caption in gold marker. The gate was never going to win. Maya looked at the photo for a long moment, then hugged Melissa. That photo went on the wall of Maya's home office, right next to her law degree. As for Karen, she remained in the neighborhood but faded into the background like a bad memory slowly losing relevance. Her social circle evaporated. Her once constant HOA micromanagement was replaced by long periods of silence. She passed us occasionally on walks, her eyes flicking away as if the sight of Maya burned her pride. There was no dramatic farewell, no tearful confession, just quiet. And in that quiet, Maya's ramp remained, not just as a functional structure, but as a symbol that change had taken root. Then, weeks later, something arrived that neither of us expected. A letter on thick stationery bearing an embossed seal. It was from a White House Advisory Committee on Civil Rights, stating that Maya's name had been submitted for a National Advocacy Commendation. It wasn't just a nomination. It came with an invitation to speak at a federal panel about accessibility in housing policy. Maya stared at the letter for a long time before saying anything. "All this," she whispered, "from one gate." She accepted. The event was scheduled for later in the year, but the news spread fast. Journalists called. A few interview requests came through. Some wanted to do profiles on the woman who took down the HOA, but Maya always corrected them. It's not about taking anyone down. It's about lifting everyone up. On the morning of the federal panel, Maya wore the same navy blazer she wore to the original court hearing. She rolled into the chamber like she had done it 1,000 times, steady and composed. She told the story not as a personal grudge, but as a systemic warning. She spoke about small-scale abuses of power and how those often cause the most damage. She ended with a simple truth: fairness shouldn't be optional. Accessibility isn't a favor, it's a right. As we left the building that day, a young congressional staffer rushed over, barely catching her breath. "Thank you," she said. "My dad's a veteran. He uses a wheelchair. We've been fighting our own HOA for months. You just gave us hope." Maya smiled, reached out and said, "Then that's worth more than any award." Back home, the ramp gleamed in the late afternoon sun. The flowers beside it bloomed brighter than ever, and the handmade sign still stood tall. "This ramp stands for all." That evening, as we sat on the porch and watched the kids chalk new drawings along the concrete, Maya leaned over to me and said, "You know, I used to hate that gate, but now I'm almost glad it was there." I looked at her, surprised. "Why?" She grinned. "Because it showed us how strong we really are, and it showed them they can't stop us. Not ever again." And with that, she rolled down the ramp, free, unblocked, unstoppable.